Jiang's troops were cornered, their backs against the Pacific Ocean, with no support from the great powers in the West. They were saved by something totally unexpected, the start of the Korean War. In a world divided into communist and anti-communist camps, suddenly the survival of Chiang Kai-shek's Free China seemed critical to American strategic interests. The Truman administration sent the U.S. Navy into the Taiwan Strait. Over the next 15 years, America would also send Taiwan more than $4 billion in aid.
美元的时代，我还很小，那个时候的美元，我们感觉得到的是什么？是
I was very young during the period of American aid.
我们感觉到的有
To us, American aid meant milk, flour, flour sacks, and especially the pants that were made from the flour sacks.
这个做这个裤子穿。
Using American aid and advice, Chiang's government began to reshape Taiwan with a major land reform program, forcing owners to give up property in return for shares in government industries. The program laid a strong foundation for economic growth and brought the nationalists popular support.
I felt really happy when I got the land because I'm a farmer and the land was now my own.
But to many Taiwanese, the mainlanders felt like another occupying army. Like the Japanese, they imposed their own interpretation of history.
The courses emphasized education in Mandarin and in Chinese history and geography. The Chinese history emphasized that since ancient times, Taiwan was part of the sacred territory of China. They claimed that as far back as the Three Kingdoms era, China had already sent troops to Taiwan.
The teacher drew a map and told us that China and Taiwan were one piece of land 2 million years ago. Blood is thicker than water, they said. This was how history was taught. The trip to school was conducted like a military drill. We lined up and marched in. At the doorway, 2 people stood like military guards at an army barrack. It was not until I entered the military that I found this situation again. The teachers' methods were exactly the same as the drilling in the military.
Everyone was enlisted to support the government's fight back to the mainland. It was a full-fledged campaign aimed at creating a society that would support Chiang Kai-shek's anti-communist crusade.
There were some patriotic songs then, like Fight Back to the Mainland. This type of patriotic song was a force-feeding method of education. We were young and did not even know where we were supposed to fight back to.
Today, we celebrate the 42nd National Day. My fellow countrymen, I encourage you. Hurry, fight back to mainland China. Destroy the communists.
As he trained his troops, Chiang was also engaged in a propaganda war. balloons with food and medicine and leaflets attached were floated over to the mainland when the winds were favorable.
国土，我们的疆域，不能让共匪尽做盘踞，不能让毛匪尽做欺负。我们要反攻回去，我们要反攻回去，反攻回去，反攻回去，把大陆收复，把大陆收复。
In Taipei, the nationalists set up all the branches of China's government. The increasingly elderly representatives gathered year after year, holding images of their mainland provinces to prove that the government on Taiwan represented all of China. They had been elected in China once in 1947 and would not be replaced, Zhang insisted, until all of China was free again. The image of free China was a key part of Zhang's fight for world support, especially for American support. It paid off in 1954 when China shelled Quemoy and Matsu, two small islands near the mainland but held by Taiwan. As both sides prepared for war, America even considered using nuclear weapons to stop China.
It is true that we want peace, and that we do want it ardently. However, we do not want it at the price of our security or of our honor. Indeed, experience shows that those who try in that way to buy peace, in fact, only increase the ultimate danger of war.
America became even more committed to Chiang Kai-shek's vision of the nationalists as the real China. The two governments signed a treaty which bound America to defend the island. Chiang Kai-shek repaid the U.S. with some of the most unyielding rhetoric of the Cold War.
Because what is the attitude of the Chinese government toward the ceasefire proposal? This is obviously a continuation of the Russian imperialist aggression in China, with the Chinese communists as the agents and an extension of the Korean and the Indo-Chinese wars.
Zhang recognized the fragility of his position and organized one of the largest standing armies in the region. Skillfully employing America's aid, his government began to build up Taiwan's industries, helping the island start its remarkable rise to international economic power. The Nationalist Party was reformed, reducing corruption and inviting Taiwanese participation in local elections. But in some essential ways, Chiang Kai-shek remained unchanged.
蒋介石基本上，我个人认为有点。
Basically, Chiang Kai-shek resembled an emperor of ancient China or of Japan.
日本式的天皇思想啊，他
He seemed to think that, like an emperor, he had to keep aloof
天高皇帝远才能
to sustain his authority and dignity.
因此，他跟社会大众、跟现实世界是非常
He
脱
was
节。
very detached from the people and the real world.
完全不了解。
For example, he knew nothing about prices. I've heard stories such as once his grandson wanted a pair of leather shoes. Zhang gave him 5 Taiwan dollars, about 20 cents back then.
他孙子说5块钱怎么够呢？他说
His grandson knew this was not enough, but Zhang said that things were cheap in Taiwan,
3块钱就好，5块钱
and his grandson could do nothing about it.
孙子无可奈何。
People also compared Chiang Kai-shek to an emperor because he seemed to be setting up a dynasty. His oldest son and closest advisor, Jiang Jingguo, was being groomed to be his successor. When Jiang Jingguo was only 15, His father sent him to study at Sun Yat-sen University in Moscow. Relations between Stalin and Chiang Kai-shek soured, and Zhang Jingguo was trapped in the Soviet Union. He spent 12 years working in a power plant in the remote Urals, and he married a Russian woman. By the time he and his family were finally allowed to return to China, he had become a very different person from his father.
老总统的个性啊，他是把所有的事情的话，统统写在脸上。
The old president was straightforward.
蒋经国先生的话，完全恰恰相反。
Mr. Zhang Jingguo was just the opposite. He was very reserved and not expressive. When he said something, it was impossible to guess from his face how he felt.
去猜测得到。
The public face of Zhang Jingguo showed a man who connected with people as his father never did. But Zhang Jingguo had another side. He was also the head of the nationalist, huge repressive security apparatus. It was used to crush any challenge to Chiang Kai-shek's power.
我咧国民学校读书的时阵，迄句去学校上课了后，
When I was in primary school, my mother told me that my father died in the February 28th incident. She warned me not to say anything outside the house or I would be arrested.
啊，到尾才知影讲，因为你出去外口若话黑白讲啊。
I understood that there were spies everywhere. They reported you. If you criticized the government, you would be arrested and taken from your house secretly. You were just disappeared. Some were sent to Green Island prison, some went to jail, and others went to who knows where.
有诶，什么送去什么黑小岛啦，有诶，毋知佫送去倒位啊，去关啊，是安怎样啊呢？都毋知影。
I didn't say anything. I was afraid I would disappear.
So many people arrested, and teacher too, professor too, disappeared. And the terror, this really terror. And no one know when someone would knock the door. Anytime, midnight, anytime, they come even without warrant.
国民政府统治台湾的手段啊，
The policy that the nationalists used to rule Taiwan was not a policy of murder. It was a policy of deterrence. Kill one, warn 100.
靠着这种恐吓政策呢，国民党才能够
With this deterrence, the nationalists survived a long time under relatively peaceful circumstances.
这么久。
It was not until the 1960s that a few individuals began to criticize Zhang's regime openly.
1964, it is 15 years after this government went into exile in Taiwan. And communist regime in Peking is quite well established, control whole China. So I thought we should point it out. What's wrong with the whole situation? It is impossible for this government to go back to China, to retake China. Secondly, we said one China, one Taiwan are already established fact. We have to accept this fact that this government is going to stay as the government of Taiwan instead of China.
Pang Ming-min and two colleagues were preparing a manifesto when the secret police burst into their room and arrested them.
I was treated well, to be fair to them, and I was sentenced to 8 years. That is very light. Usually this kind of crime is death.
也就是在戒严的时候啊，每一个作家
Every writer had a police headquarters in his mind under martial
心
law.
里面都有一个小型的警备司令部，政府中的政府，所以每
The police really ran things, and everyone had a little police headquarters inside himself. You would think, this phrase I wrote, would they approve?
什么反应？
One of Bo Yang's jobs at the newspaper was translating the comics into Chinese.
这四张画上说是大力水手或者
Popeye and his son were in exile on an island, and they were campaigning for election there.
竞选， 发表演说。
Popeye gave a speech, and he used an English word, fellows.
英文叫做 fellows 我想 fellows 可以翻译几百种了。
There could be hundreds of translations for fellows, but I chose one which was all my fellow countrymen.
这就不得了了。
This was terrible. The Bureau of Investigation arrested me, saying, "Why didn't you translate it into something else?"
全世界只有我们的元首用。
This is exactly the way our President Zhang speaks. You are making fun of him. It's on an island, and it's a father and his son. This attacks our national leadership. It deserves the death penalty, no doubt the death penalty.
After months of beatings and a closed military trial, Bo Yang was sent to the isolated Green Island prison for undermining the affections between the people and the government.
During my 10 years in prison, I had time to examine all my past experiences. I felt that our entire Chinese culture of 5,000 years was sick. Our culture had begun to stagnate, like a river that no longer runs. It had become a dead pond of water, rotting, losing its air, producing vapors, beginning to stink. It was like a vat of fermenting soy sauce, or like a sticky, sticky jar of something more terrible than glue.
Some people now say that there must have been unjust cases. The name White Terror is used. But if you look at it from the viewpoint of government, the situation was quite different from now. Mao Zedong was threatening to overrun Taiwan and to force Taiwan under communist rule.
In Mao Zedong's China, this was the period of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. With its threatening images of rampaging destruction and calls for liberating Taiwan.
The Cultural Revolution burned down everything that was considered traditional. Another puppet master told me that during the Cultural Revolution, several puppet troops in Guangzhou were forced to pour gasoline on the puppets and burn them all. The senior masters had spent all their lives with those puppets and had nothing to do with politics. They ended with everything burnt up and nothing to pass on to the next generation. They were so upset that they got sick and died. Puppet theater in Taiwan is better than in mainland China because they had the Cultural Revolution and we had cultural rejuvenation.
The Republic of China's policies were carefully calibrated. On Taiwan, Chiang's government maintained its repressive police state, while on the world stage it promoted itself as a stronghold of freedom and the real China. In the 1960s, Taiwan began losing ground.
It's a matter of survival for us. In order to survive, we must have countries that recognize us. We cannot afford to be a country which is not recognized by anybody.
A number of nations, including France, Canada, and Italy, broke relations with Taipei and recognized Beijing. But as long as the U.S. supported them, Chiang's government could feel secure.
There can be no stable and enduring peace without the participation of the People's Republic of China and its 750 million people. That is why I have undertaken initiatives in several areas to open the door for more normal relations between our two countries.
The staunch anti-communists who had supported Chiang Kai-shek for decades were appalled. Although the U.S. still maintained diplomatic relations with the Republic of China on Taiwan, Nixon's speech was a signal that the U.S. was moving towards Beijing. It also meant that America could no longer prevent the communists from taking the China seat at the United Nations.
In view of the frenzy and the irrational manners that have been exhibited in this hall, the delegation of the Republic of China has now decided not to take part to any further proceedings of this General Assembly.
Rather than be expelled, Taiwan's delegation withdrew.
Our policy was to affirm representation for Peking, and that part of the policy worked out. I think that the damage is more one of principle, a deeply held conviction that the UN would be ill-served by, one, expelling this government, and two, setting the precedent for expulsion itself. But I think we'll have to, I think all would concede, friend of or foe alike, that the UN, once Peking gets here, will be a more realistic forum. But the price tag was pretty high. The price tag of expulsion is what troubles me.
On behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, I hereby reiterate that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory, and the U.S. armed invasion and occupation of China's Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits cannot, in the least, alter the sovereignty of the People's Republic of China over Taiwan.
Don't tell me that the world is in peace now. With the communists over there, there will be no peace. You will see there will be more trouble in future.
What kind of trouble do you think is possible?
Well, remember Munich? When Chamberlain? Well, that's a story you would tell, the whole thing.
民国60年，这个台湾呢，从联合国撤退出来以后。
Taiwan's government faced a very serious issue when they left the UN. Before, the Nationalist Party could say, Taiwan is the only legal government of China, and we are the government party. After Taiwan was forced out of the UN, the Republic of China lost its international status. The Nationalist Party had to explain this to Taiwan's 16 million people. After we defeat Mao, the Republic of China can be reunited. This is our goal, and this is the only way we can protect security in Asia and maintain world peace.
Increasingly, the voice of the Nationalist Party was Chiang Kai-shek's son, John Jingguo. Since 1972, Chiang Kai-shek, the only president of the Republic of China that most people could remember, had been ill and was rarely seen in public.
Once, as the doctor was trying to bring him out of a coma, he began talking. I heard him say over and over again that he wanted to fight back and save the people on the mainland. Fight back to China and rescue our compatriots, he said.
On April 5th, 1975, Chiang Kai-shek died. Chiang had been America's ally in Asia in World War II. After his defeat in China, he had emerged as a hero of the Cold War. Forced onto Taiwan, he had ruthlessly crushed all opposition, but he also revitalized the island's economy and gave its people a stake in their future. But the world had become less concerned about Jiang and Taiwan. President Ford planned to send his Secretary of Agriculture to the funeral. The Republic of China was so insulted that he sent Vice President Rockefeller instead.
The Nationalist Party was still the only ruling power. Taiwan was still under martial law. I knew there were many risks ahead. But I thought this was also an opportunity to push for democracy in Taiwan.
A small opposition movement began to grow in Taiwan. Forbidden under martial law from organizing politically, they called themselves the Dongwai, people outside the ruling party. And they began running for local offices.
We knew it was risky because the nationalists wouldn't let us form our own party. But we were encouraged by the public support. We felt it gave us an advantage, the way the weaker side can have advantages in a wrestling match.
In this new era, the Taiwanese began exploring their island's unique identity. Like the mainlanders, they saw themselves as Chinese, but with a local flavor that mixed in Japanese and Aboriginal influences.